Life can take us in strange directions. No matter how intricately our best laid plans are, life has a way of disregarding them, as if they were nothing more than a fly buzzing around its head. For example, I wanted to be an electrical engineer. I had had a few colleges in mind and was looking forward to graduating high school. Now, I'm in Ketchikan, Alaska, getting ready to head north. I'm going to be leaving a lot of my technology here, as it'll be useless once I get where I'm going. Which, come to think of it, is nowhere really. I don't have a plan. But, regardless, I wanted to take a moment to recount the events of the last couple years that led me here. For starters, my name's Jake, and I've been living on the road for quite a while now. I'm from a small town in the Midwest called Riverstone, where I was born and raised. Some people from small towns tend to dislike them, or at least can't wait to leave. Not me though. I loved Riverstone. And it breaks my heart to know I'll never be able to go back. All because of the events which took place my senior year. It was a cool Friday night at the end of homecoming week. My classmates and I sat on our school's bleachers, cheering on our football team with enough energy to power the whole town. We were seniors, so this was going to be our last homecoming game. We wanted to enjoy it while it lasted. At the end of the first quarter, there was a short timeout to let people get snacks and use the restroom or whatever while the teams get ready to play again. My friends and I were sitting at the back of the bleachers, so we had a pretty clear view of the field and surrounding area. Two of them had gone to get snacks, while the other, a guy named Matt, was messaging his girlfriend on his phone. I, meanwhile, just stared out at the crowd and field, not really thinking about anything. As I scanned the crowd, my eyes fell upon a girl across from me in the away team's bleachers. It was hard to make out any details of her face, but from what I could see, she was gorgeous. Long brown hair, glasses, and a smile so bright it rivaled the overhead lights. I continued to steal glances at her occasionally. Her looks aside, I was really just trying to see if she was there with a boyfriend, or if he was playing for their team. She wasn't wearing a jersey, which gave me hope, but that fact was made immediately irrelevant just before halftime. After a particularly good play by her team, I looked up to gauge her reaction, only to be met by bare flesh where her face used to be, and she was looking in my direction. At least, the chill down my spine told me she was looking at me. It was hard to tell without any facial features. On top of that, she was dead still, like a scarecrow in a field of swaying corn. The people around her jostled and swayed, but she didn't move an inch. Not a single person took notice of her either. People bumped into her a few times, but they didn't react, as if the way she acted was perfectly normal. Thoroughly freaked out, I nudged Matt and got his attention. Thankfully, I'd pointed her out to him earlier in the game, so he knew where to look. In the moments I looked away and back again, though, she had returned to normal. Matt gave me a quizzical look for pointing the girl out to him again, but I was too dumbfounded to care. I thought maybe it was the distance, that my eyes had simply lost focus for a second and turning my head got them to refocus. An explanation which, at the time, made total sense. So I brushed it off and continued watching the game. Now, I need to give a bit of context for this next part. From where my friends and I were sitting, we could see the opposing team's sideline clearly. This was perfect, since their coach was an absolute hothead. I mean, like, forehead vein bulging, red in the face kind of guy. Every time his team would mess up, he'd be shouting like his life depended on it, and it was hilarious. So, when his players made a mistake, I would scan their sideline to see his reaction. After one such play, I did like I always had, but found the bare flesh looking up at me once again. Just like the girl, the coach stood completely still despite all the people moving around him. and no one seemed to notice his odd behavior or lack of a goddamn face. afraid that looking away might cause it to disappear again. I tried to get Matt's attention without breaking line of sight. Unfortunately, the universe had other plans as a man shuffled past me just as I was tapping Matt's arm. By the time the man had passed, the coach was back to his shouting, red-faced self. Matt looked over at me. The look on his face must have caused him to speak up.
"Hey man, you alright?"
he asked, placing a hand on my shoulder. I continued to stare at the coach, but was pulled out of my dismay by Matt's hand. "Yeah," I said, not facing him. "Just thought I saw someone we knew."
"You sure? You look like you've seen a ghost."
I turned to look at him. "Yeah, man, I'm good." My words were cut off as a lump lodged itself in my throat. Behind Matt were my two other friends, but next to them were people we didn't know. The closest of those people, the one right next to my friend, was leaning forward in his seat. His arms hung straight down, limply swaying with the crowd. His head was turned at an angle just too sharp to be natural, and his face was gone. I lost it. I stood up and barreled through the audience with instinct and adrenaline guiding my every move. Before I knew it, I was out of the crowd and racing towards the parking lot. My phone began to ring, but I didn't answer it. All I could do at that moment was run, so I did. My feet hit the pavement, and my lungs heaved air as I ran to my car, jumped in it, and peeled out of that parking lot faster than ever. Honestly, looking back, I'm surprised I didn't get stopped by someone or pulled over. Guess I should count myself lucky, because in that state, I would have probably been arrested. But that didn't happen, and I made it home in one piece. I told my mom I wasn't feeling good and locked myself in my room for the rest of the night. I tried to rest, but my mind wouldn't stop thinking about the faceless people. No matter what I did to distract myself, the thoughts just kept coming. I did manage to fall into a restless sleep eventually, though. But when I woke up the next morning, it was into an entirely new world. Over the course of the next school year, I continually saw the faceless entity. There was no consistency to it, at least not that I could notice, but it only popped up in crowds and only affected humans. Activity slowed dramatically as the weather grew colder, but picked right back up again in the spring. That was when I got the idea to try and get proof that what I was seeing wasn't just in my head. It started as a spur-of-the-moment thing. I was out with some friends, including Matt, when I noticed it standing across the street. It had possessed a businessman and was staring at me. Notably, it still held a cell phone to its ear with one hand and a briefcase in the other. My skin began to crawl with the chill of its gaze, but my phone vibrated in my hand, causing the light bulb to shine. Without a second thought, I held my phone in my peripheral vision, careful not to pull focus away from the creature, and opened the camera app. I held the device as steady as I could and snapped multiple pictures. When I was done, I felt comfortable enough to look away so I could examine the photos, only to find they were useless. The pictures were so blurry it was impossible to make out any significant details. The shape of the man was obvious, as was his surroundings, but everything else was incomprehensible. I considered at first that maybe I'd been shaking while I took the photos, but then later attempts looked the same. I knew it wasn't me. Disappointed, I deleted the photos like an idiot and sighed. I looked back to where the creature had been, and found the businessman walking by as if nothing had broken his stride while he talked on the phone. I looked over to my friends and found Matt, giving me a quizzical look. Thought I saw a cool bird.
"Since when do you birdwatch?"
he asked, grinning. I don't. It was just a cool looking bird.
"Well, let me see."
The pictures didn't turn out. The camera was out of focus. Matt gave me another look. This one a mixture of knowing curiosity. The subject was quickly dropped though, and we got back to just hanging out. Ever since, I've tried multiple times to get pictures of the thing with multiple different cameras, both digital and analog, only to get the same result. A blurry image with no discernible details. Which I guess could be evidence in and of itself, or it's just proof that I'm a shitty photographer. From there, things continued to escalate as summer rolled in, and it got to the point where I was seeing the damn thing every single day. Even on my days off, when I never left the house, I'd see it standing in the street outside my house, just staring at me through the windows. I tried researching it, believe me, but every time I looked up something about faceless people, I'd either get Slender Man or some obscure creepypastas. I considered talking to my friends, but I thought they'd think I was crazy. Hell, at the time I thought I was losing it. So I did the one thing I could, and confided in my parents. One thing you should know about my parents is that they loved me and my little sister with all their hearts. But they were not what you'd call cool parents. They could be very strict at times, and were very demanding more often than not. They expected a lot from me and my sister, but it's only because they wanted us to succeed in life and never sell ourselves short. That being said, I heard them mention throughout my childhood that they didn't believe in mental illness. They thought that depression, anxiety, hell, even schizophrenia is something that could just be thought away. That should make it clear enough that such things don't run in my family at all, at least as far as I know. So, I was scared going into dinner. I'd had everything I wanted to say laid out in my head, and I even had a few of the better pictures I'd taken to help plead my case. My sister was staying at a friend's house, so she wouldn't be there for any fallout. It was foolproof in my mind. Mom, Dad, there's something I need to talk to you about, I said, once we finished eating. We were sitting at the table. My dad was at the head to my right, and my mom was sitting across from me. What's up, sweetie? My mom asked, wiping her mouth with a napkin. Dad didn't say anything. He just tilted his head to face me. Well, I'm not sure how to explain it, so I'm just gonna cut right to the chase. I pulled out the photos from my back pocket and handed them to my mom. She took them, and her expression grew confused. I've been seeing faceless people, I said, feeling ridiculous. As soon as I spoke, my mom's eyes grew wide and the color drained from her face. She threw the pictures on the floor and stood up from the table in unison with my dad. You what? My dad shouted, making his way around the table towards me. I stood and held my hands up defensively. What, Dad? What's the big... I tried to say, but was interrupted when he grabbed my shirt collar with both hands. How long has this been happening? My mother retreated into the kitchen, her sobs practically shaking the walls. I don't know. Since September, I guess? September? Why didn't you tell us sooner? I don't know. I didn't think you'd believe me. I could hardly believe it myself. I raised my voice with that last sentence, trying to gain a semblance of control. Does your sister know? He said, pushing me away from the table towards the living room. No, I haven't told anyone but you. Good. Then get the hell out of this house and don't ever come back, he shouted, moving his still grip to my shoulders and pushing me with even more force. Mom, I yelled, trying to fight back against my dad's force. Why? She wailed from the kitchen. Why did it have to be my baby? I struggled with my dad for a while, begging him not to do this, but his voice was resolute, despite the tears welling in the corners of his eyes. In the end, though, he won out with a knee to my stomach that winded me enough to let him shove me to the floor. He dragged me by my arms across the living room and towards the front door. He opened it, picked me up to my feet, and gave one last shove, sending me sprawling out onto the front step. Just before he closed the door, I could see the sadness overtaking his anger, and I heard my mother's continuous wails. For the next couple of hours, I banged on the door repeatedly, begging to be let back in. I got no response. Eventually, the realization they weren't going to let me back inside took hold, so I switched to begging for my car keys so I could at least sleep in there if I had to. I heard some shuffling inside, and after a few moments my keys and wallet came flying out of my bedroom window. I picked them up from the front lawn and walked to my car. I sat there for a long time, just swimming in my thoughts and emotions, until the streetlights came on. The sudden, off-white glow pulled my attention for just long enough to get my head on straight. For the moment, my emotional turmoil was buried beneath ideas of what to do, where to go next. My first thought was to call my extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even my grandparents lived within driving distance. I figured I could stay with one of them and let this situation blow over. But all of my calls were rejected. Assuming my parents had contacted them, I started calling my friends. Most of them answered, but when I explained the situation, they instantly hung up. So, as much as it killed me, I decided to call Matt, but not tell him the specifics of what happened. I wanted to see him in person before I told him any of that. "Yo," he said after a few rings. "Hey man, you busy?"
Nah, I'm just chilling. What's up?
My parents are throwing a fit right now and I just need to talk to somebody about it.
Sure, man. You want me to come by your place?
Actually, let's meet at Bury Park.
Bet. Let me get some nicer clothes and I'll be there in 10.
Alright man, see you soon. With that, I drove to the park in silence. With how hectic my head was at that moment, the radio would have just been noise anyway. I got there well before Matt would, so I got out of my car and headed over to the playground. I climbed to the top of the dome-shaped jungle gym and sat in my usual spot on the cool metal. I watched the sky turn from light blue to pink and orange on the horizon as time ticked by. My paranoia grew every minute I was out there, but from my position I could see everything around me. If anyone, or anything, appeared, I'd see them long before they got close. I checked my phone over and over again, but had no word from Matt. When he did finally arrive, I'd been there for over 20 minutes. He pulled up, parked next to my car, and jogged over shortly after. "Man, it's been a minute since we were here last. What happened to be there in 10?
Sorry, I got a bit distracted. But I'm here now. That's gotta count for something, right?
I guess."
So, what's up?
He said as he climbed to sit beside me. I sighed and looked down at my interlocked hands in my lap. Despite an extra 10 minutes of prep time, I hadn't even thought about how to bring this up to him.
Gummy worm?
I turned to face him, and saw he held a freshly opened bag of gummy worms in one hand, and was offering me a few with the other. Sure, thanks," I said, taking the treats. We sat in silence for a bit, eating our candy and watching the sky continue to change. I knew time was short though. I wanted to get out of town while there was still daylight if possible. So, I finally spoke up. "Listen, Matt, this is really hard for me to talk about."
It's okay, bro. You know I got your back no matter what.
I turned my head to look at him, and he beamed at me. Then his eyes grew wide.
Aw, man. Don't tell me you're coming out to me right now,
he said.
What?
Matt laughed.
I'm just saying. You told me your parents were having a fit and you didn't want to be at home right now, so I just figured,
No, dude, that's not it at all.
Oh. Well, that's good. No, not that I wouldn't accept you if you were gay. It'd just be, weird for me.
I just stared at him incredulously.
Okay, I'm sorry. Tell me, what's up?
He said, popping another gummy worm into his mouth. Do you remember homecoming when I freaked out and ran from the bleachers to go home?
Yeah, I remember. You said you were real sick and had to go home.
Yeah, that night. Well, I wasn't really sick. I was freaked out because I kept seeing a faceless person in the crowd. Matt furrowed his brow and turned to look at me.
What do you mean?
I then explained everything from that night onward. I explained the reason I took the pictures of the businessman when we were out, and my parents' reaction when I told them about it. As I talked, Matt's expression turned more and more serious. By the time I was done, he wasn't facing me anymore. His head and eyes were cast downward to the wood chips below us. An uncomfortable silence passed before either of us moved.
I can't be around you,
Matt said, jumping off the jungle gym. He hit the ground hard and straightened up, still not looking at me.
I'm sorry, Jake. My parents warned me something like this might happen and told me to get as far away as possible from whoever told me about it.
He began to walk away, and I leapt to the ground to follow him. Wait, Matt, please. I don't know who else to turn to or where to go. I'm scared, man. Please. He continued walking without saying a thing. So you're gonna forget about me just like that? I spat, venom replacing the desperation. Everything we did as kids, all the shit we got into in high school, all the times I was there for you, you're just gonna forget that?
This is different,
he said as he unlocked his car.
How?
How is this different? Dude, I don't know what's going on or why everyone is ignoring me. Can you at least tell me that? I feel like the only person on Earth who doesn't know what's happening. Matt got into his car and started the engine. My heart sank at the thought of him just driving away. But instead, he rolled down his window just enough to talk to me.
It doesn't have a name,
he said, still not looking at me.
But my grandma called it Gesichtdieb.
What the hell is that?
It's German. I don't know what it means. Look it up when you get a chance.
Okay, but before I could say another word, Matt put his car in reverse. I slammed my hand down on the roof of it to stop him. Matt, wait! He didn't move, but also didn't put his car back in park. Let me stay at your place tonight, please. One night. That's all I'm asking. I just don't want to be alone if this thing is going to come after me. Indecision played across Matt's face. I felt bad for doing this to my friend, but I just needed the one night. One night to get my feet under me and come up with a real plan.
Okay. One night. Follow me home. You know where it is.
With that, he backed up quickly and sped out of the parking lot. I hopped in my own car and sped all the way to Matt's place. We got there in record time, and Matt walked me inside, though he still gave me the cold shoulder. His parents greeted me as warmly as ever, and it almost brought me to tears thinking I'd more than likely never get this response from my own parents ever again. When they asked why I was coming over so late, Matt chimed in with his coming out of the closet story, and I didn't argue. The rest of the night was spent in Matt's room, going through bouts of silence broken up by the occasional game of Halo or Mario Kart. Most of the time we just sat on our phones and watched Netflix. We both agreed to go to sleep around midnight, but before we really got settled in, Matt started digging through his closet. After a few seconds, he pulled out a backpack and his old Nintendo Switch. He put the handheld into the bag and began filling it with snacks from the hidden stash he kept under his bed. When he was satisfied, he moved over to his stack of games and looked at them for a moment before turning to me.
Which ones do you want?
What?
Which ones do you want? You can't have Smash Bros. Though. That one's mine.
I knew right away what he was doing. Matt, I can't take...
Look, if you're gonna be out on the road, then you'll need something to entertain yourself,
he said, looking back at the games.
So, which ones do you want? If you don't pick, I'm gonna pick for you.
In spite of my misgivings, I took Mario Kart 8 and Breath of the Wild.
Shit, I'll throw in Puyo Puyo Tetris for free,
Matt said, dropping the game case into the bag. He zipped it up and handed it over to me. I hesitated for a moment, but took the bag from him still. Thanks, I said, placing the bag next to my spot on the floor.
Don't mention it.
He turned off the lights and got into his bed while I got comfortable on the floor. I knew sleep wasn't going to come easy for me, but I managed to drift off after a little while. I was awoken in the middle of the night by loud clanging downstairs. It sounded like someone was sifting through pots and pans in the kitchen. I sat up and checked my phone. The time read 4:36 a.m. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I looked over to Matt's bed and found it vacant. His blankets were strewn aside and the door to his room was open. My heart began racing in my chest as I got up and crept over to the open door. I peeked around the corner and saw Matt crouched at the top of the stairs. Light came from downstairs on the left side, which led into the kitchen. Psst, I hissed, as quietly as I could. Matt's head whipped around so fast I thought it twisted right off his neck. Relief washed over him as he realized it was me, and he gestured for me to come to him. I inched my way out into the hall and crouched over to him.
I think someone broke in.
It was then that I noticed he held his pocket knife in one hand. What should we do? I asked. Before Matt could reply, the clanging downstairs ceased. We both tensed and stared at the bright doorway just below us. We didn't hear any footsteps, but the lights in the kitchen suddenly went off. Something that shouldn't have been possible, since the light switch was a good 8 feet away from the stove and cabinets. Now, bathed in darkness, we crouched there in silence. My eyes had adjusted to the bright light, meaning I was basically blind until they readjusted to the darkness again. They never got that chance, though. Even in the shadows, I could see it poke its faceless head around the corner of the kitchen. It moved with mechanical smoothness, stopping just where the nose would be and only exposing the top half of its head. Its hand reached out and gripped the corner of the wall, as if to steady itself. No, not to steady itself. It was getting ready to pounce. "Matt, we need to move," I whispered, tugging on his shirt.
"That's my mom,"
he said. In the heat of the moment, I'd forgotten that the creature didn't have a form of its own. It always had to borrow one. "Matt, she's gonna be fine, I promise. Right now, we need to get away from it." Normally, it would vanish as soon as I looked away, but something was different now. I'd seen it move. It was in a position to attack. I didn't know what would happen now, but that same instinct to run screamed inside me like it had during homecoming.
"Okay, let's go,"
Matt said. We both began to move backward, but the creature mirrored it by moving closer to us. We stopped, and it stopped. My heart pounded impossibly in my chest as I realized we were at a stalemate. As soon as we'd make a break for it, so would the creature, and I'd put money on it being faster than the two of us.
"Run,"
Matt hissed through gritted teeth.
"What? Go get the bag and climb out the bedroom window."
I then remembered that Matt's house had an old metal trellis just outside his bedroom window. We'd use it a ton of times to sneak in and out of his house when we were younger, but that was years ago.
"It's not gonna hold me." "It will. I used it last week to go see Kylie."
I knew there was no arguing with him, and a small part of me hoped that if I ran, perhaps the creature would chase me and forget about Matt entirely. "Thanks," was all I could say to him before I slowly crept backward. As expected, the creature mirrored my movement. I stopped, took a breath, and went for it. I turned as quickly as I could and bolted for Matt's bedroom. I heard the thing rush up the steps behind me, followed by Matt's scream. In one fluid motion, I grabbed the bag he'd prepared for me and ran for the window. Thankfully, we'd kept it open last night, so I was able to burst through the screen and hang on the windowsill. I got my feet planted on the trellis just as the sound of footsteps raced towards me from inside. I reached down with one hand and grabbed the metal just as a steel grip took my other one. An ungodly crunch sounded through the air as the creature gripped my fingers so tightly it felt like they were broken. As if I weighed nothing, it began to pull me back into the window, but I screamed and pulled back. My arm stretched unnaturally, and more pain flared from my wrist to my shoulder. I thought it was going to rip my arm clean off when I heard Matt scream again from inside. He collided with the creature and stabbed the hand that held mine with his pocket knife. The creature's grip loosened, and I managed to slip free. The force from my pulling caused me to fall backward off the trellis and hit the ground hard. All of my breath escaped my lungs, and I laid heaving on the ground, hearing the sounds of a scuffle up in Matt's room. My friend was screaming still, but it wasn't in defiance anymore. It was terror and pain. I got to my feet and stumbled through Matt's backyard around his house. I got to my car, started it, then laid on the horn. "Hey!" I shouted at the top of my lungs. "I'm out here, you son of a bitch!" Within seconds, the front door to Matt's house opened, revealing the thing standing there. Now that I had its attention, I put my car in reverse and peeled out of Matt's driveway before bolting down the road. I checked the rear-view mirror, but didn't see it following me, which I took as a good thing. I drove for as long as my gas tank would let me. It was about 8 a.m. when I had to pull over for gas in a town I'd never been to before. Now, in broad daylight with minimal people around, I took a second to sift through my bag. I found a granola bar, ate it, then went out and paid for some gas. Once I was filled up, I continued my journey for another couple hours until coming to a rest stop at about 10 a.m. I went inside, bought myself lunch, and withdrew every penny I could from my bank accounts. Then, with cash in hand, I kept going. After a few more hours, I found a wayside and pulled over. I wasn't really tired, but I had to take a break from driving, and figured this random wayside would be devoid of people for a while. I leaned back in my seat and rubbed my forehead. I reached into the bag for another snack, but my hand brushed against something soft and rubbery. Confused, I pulled it out and remembered Matt's old Switch was in a cheap carrying case. With nothing better to do, I opened up the case and took out the console. That's when I noticed the cracks along the screen, and I realized I must have landed on it when I fell from the window. My heart sank as I stared into my own fractured reflection. I prayed that it still worked and turned it on. The screen came to life with the Nintendo Switch logo, and not too long after showed a perfectly clear menu. I breathed a sigh of relief, and hoped that this was a sign Matt himself was okay. Unfortunately, I'd left my phone charging in his room the night before, so I had no way to find out what happened. For the rest of the night, I oscillated between playing games and sitting on the trunk of my car. There wasn't much else to do, since I didn't want to drive anymore. The one night I had to plan was wasted, so I took the time to plan out my next move, but was too tired to really think of anything solid. I went to bed just as the sun began to set. When I woke up the next morning, a dense fog had settled in the area around the wayside. I couldn't see hardly 30 feet in front of me. The air was cool when I got out, though, and it felt really good to stretch my legs. I soaked in the silence, thankful at first, but then it hit me that everything was too quiet. There were no bird songs, no bugs buzzing, and nothing rustled in the forest next to the wayside. Even the wind was calm. A steely fear crept into my veins, and I quickly got back into my car. The automatic headlights came to life with the engine, and their sudden brightness pulled my eyes to the front of the car. I switched them to the fog light setting, and was about to put the car in drive when a dull smack radiated from my passenger window. The steely fear I felt before turned to ice, freezing me in place. It was stupid to look, I know. I should have just drove off and never looked back. But people are curious creatures, so I did look. On the other side of the window was the Gesichtstieb. It was still possessing Matt's mom, from what I could tell. Her pajamas were covered in mud and blood, scratches and cuts clearly visible across every inch of its body. It had one hand coated with dried blood pressed against the glass. Everything else was about as what you'd expect. Only this time, it had a face. It had taken the skin of another person's head and stuck it to its own head like a sick mask. It had facial features, like a mouth and eye sockets, but beneath them was just bare flesh. My breath froze in my throat as it reached up with another hand and pushed up the corners of the mouth, forming a smile. That's when I recognized the face of my best friend. His smile was undeniable. I don't remember much after that, just a lot of pavement through teary eyes. Over the next few years, I traveled the country, working odd jobs that paid cash while sleeping in my car. It was during one of those jobs that a coworker of mine mentioned a job opportunity in Alaska. I was hesitant at first, but then I remembered the creature's aversion to cold. Nowhere in the US was colder than Alaska. So I asked him for more details, and he got me in touch with the guy running everything. Suddenly, I had plans to travel to Alaska in a couple of weeks. During this time, I decided against my better judgment to head back to Riverstone. It'd been a long time since I was there, and I knew I'd probably never get to go back once I was in Alaska. So, I went. I went to Matt's house first. The cars out front looked like his parents', but they were both caked with dirt. The grass had also grown very unkempt, as if it hadn't been cut in months. All of the shades were pulled down, blocking me from seeing inside. Not that I wanted to, of course. Then I went to my old house. It was abandoned, but not totally destroyed. All the doors and windows were boarded up, trash littered the yard, and the grass looked just like Matt's. Otherwise, it was as it had been the day I left. I looked up to where my bedroom had been on the second floor, and felt a tug in my heart at the memories. "Jake?" a female voice said from my right. I looked over and saw a girl who looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place a name to her face. She wore an olive green sweater with black jeans and a beat-up pair of Vans. Her hair was blonde, and she wore glasses in front of her sea green eyes. "Don't recognize me?" she asked, taking a step forward. "No, I'm sorry," I said, leaning back against my car. "Jake, it's me, Kylie." Immediately, I recognized her, though when I last saw her, she wore band tees and had jet black hair. I guess the blonde was her natural color. "Oh my God, Kylie." "It's okay," she said, holding up a hand. "I'm not mad at you." I'm sorry," was all I could say. She pursed her lips and looked down at her shoes. "You know, he called me that night," she said, looking back up to me. "When you were driving to his house, he called me. He told me what was going on and was unsure about letting you stay. I told him he was being ridiculous and that it was just one night." She sniffled and tears welled up in her eyes. "He said he wanted to go with you. Said he didn't want you to face this alone. But he was afraid of leaving me behind." Her sobbing grew stronger, and she placed her head in her hands, muffling the tears. I just stood there in silence. As afraid of that thing as he was, he knew he'd never live with himself if he didn't help you. So I told him to go. I told him to help you. That was the last time I spoke to him." She wiped a few tears from her face, and I offered her some tissues that I kept in my glove box. Once she was composed, I spoke. What are you doing here?" "I figured you'd be over at Matt's." "His parents don't want to see me anymore. I told them what I just told you, and they didn't take it too well. And their house isn't abandoned, yours is. I come here to make sure no one vandalized it." I appreciate that." Another silence passed between us while Kylie composed herself a bit. "I'm sorry, I know it was a while ago, but it still hurts." "Believe me, I get it," I replied, glancing back up at my old house. "So, why are you here?" I explained how I'd been living the past few years, the job in Alaska, and my desire to see the town one last time. I left out the part about the Geschichtstieb in Matt's face. "Wow," was all she could say, turning to look at the house with me. Kylie and I had never been super close. We only knew each other through Matt since they were dating. In that moment, though, we were both walking down our own memory lanes, each slightly different, but both rooted in my old house and Matt's life. I remembered coming home from school with Matt by my side as we ran up to my room to play Xbox. I remembered riding our bikes through town, stopping at various parks to just hang out and talk with our friends. I remembered sitting with Matt at Bury Park, talking about anything and everything that came to our minds until the sun was setting and we had to leave before it got dark. Everything was much simpler then. In the blink of an eye, it was all over. and years stood between now and then. An impossibly long distance. A familiar chill ran down my back, pulling me out of the memories. I looked to my right at the nearest street corner and saw the creature there. It's taken over some poor woman who'd been walking her dog. The animal tugged on its leash, urging the woman forward, but the Gesichtdieb didn't budge an inch. Despite its ghastly appearance, which I'd grown accustomed to, the thing didn't have any malice in its glare. Like it was letting me have this moment, but wanted me to know it was still there. "Hey, you okay?" Kylie asked. "It's there," I said, not breaking my stare. In my peripheral vision, I saw Kylie glance over at the woman. She looked for a moment, then turned back. "Where?" "Right there. The woman walking her dog." "Jake, there's no one there." I continued to stare at the creature without saying another word. I could feel Kylie getting tense next to me, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let this thing scare me off. That's when it did something I would have never seen coming. It reached up with the woman's free hand and placed her index finger and thumb about where the corners of her mouth would be and pushed them up. Panic welled in my gut and I tore away my gaze from the monster. I began shivering like it was 20 below outside and hunched forward as nausea rolled over me. "Holy shit, Jake, are you okay?" Kylie asked, placing a hand on my back. I swallowed the impending vomit and took control of my breathing. After a minute or so, I felt good enough to stand back up. I looked over to where the creature had been, and thankfully it was gone. "I need to leave. Thank you for watching the house, but it's okay if it rots. I don't care anymore." Kylie stood back and was about to argue, but stopped herself. The look on my face told her I wasn't gonna budge. "Well, reach out when you get to Alaska, okay?" "Will do." Looking back, I feel sort of bad for not following up, but I just can't bring myself to message her. So, Kylie, if you're somehow reading this, I'm sorry. But that brings me back to where this post started. I've been in Alaska for a bit now, and will be heading north soon. The creature has been around, but it seems hesitant now. It's appeared to me from farther away than usual and hasn't made moves to get closer. Maybe it knows what I'm planning. Regardless, I'm going through with my plan. I can only imagine the change in behavior is due to my actions, so pushing onward is the best thing I can do. I won't have an internet connection where I'm going, so don't expect any updates after tomorrow. I won't have any internet connection where I'm going, so don't expect any updates after tomorrow. I wouldn't post even if I did, to be honest. I'd rather leave all of this behind me and try to live my life as best I can for as long as I can. Matt, I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're at peace wherever you are.